Holes Chapter 3. Stanley Yelnats was the only passenger on the bus, not counting the driver or the guard. The guard sat next to the driver with his seat turned facing Stanley. A rifle lay across his lap. Stanley was sitting about 10 rows back, handcuffed to his armrest. His backpack lay on the seat next to him. It contained his toothbrush, toothpaste, and a box of stationery his mother had given him. He had promised to write her at least once a week. I'm right here, by the way. He looked out the window. Although there wasn't much to see, mostly fields of hay and cotton. He was on a long bus ride to nowhere. The bus wasn't air conditioned, and the hot, heavy air was almost as stifling as the handcuffs. Stanley and his parents had tried to pretend that he was just going away for a while, just like the rich kids do. When Stanley was younger, he used to play with stuffed animals and pretend the animals were at camp. Right here, Camp Fun and Games, he called it. Sometimes he'd have them play soccer with a marble. Other times, they'd run an obstacle course or go bungee jumping off a table, tied to broken rubber bands. Now, Stanley had to pretend he was going to Camp Fun and Games. Maybe he'd make some friends, he thought. At least he'd get to swim in the lake. He didn't have any friends at home. He was overweight, and the kids at his middle school often teased him about his size. Even his teachers sometimes made cruel comments about it without realizing it. We're right here at the top. On his last day of school, his math teacher, Mrs. Bell, taught ratios. As an example, she chose the heaviest kid in the class and the lightest kid in the class and had them weigh themselves. Stanley weighed 3 times as much as the other boy. Mrs. Bell wrote a ratio on the board, 3 to 1, unaware of how much embarrassment she had caused both of them. Stanley was arrested later that day. He looked at the guard, who sat slumped in his seat, and wondered if he had fallen asleep. The guard was wearing sunglasses, so Stanley couldn't see his eyes. Stanley was not a bad kid. He was innocent of the crime for which he was convicted. He had just been at the wrong place at the wrong time. We're right here. It was all because of his no good, dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-great-grandfather. He smiled. It was a family joke. Whenever anything went wrong, they always blamed Stanley's. No good, dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-great-grandfather. Supposedly, he had a great-great-grandfather who had stolen a pig from a one-legged gypsy, and she put a curse on him and all his descendants. Right here. Stanley and his parents didn't believe in curses, of course, but whenever anything went wrong, it felt good to be able to blame someone. Things went wrong a lot. They always seemed to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Chapter 4. Stanley felt somewhat dazed as the guard unlocked his handcuffs and let him off the bus. He'd been on the bus for over 8 hours. Be careful, the bus driver said to Stanley as he walked down the steps. Stanley wasn't sure if the bus driver meant for him to be careful down the steps or if he was telling him to be careful at Camp Greenleaf. Thanks for the ride, he said. His mouth was dry and his throat hurt. He stepped onto the hard, dry dirt. There was a band of sweat around his wrist where the handcuffs had been. The land was barren and desolate. He could see few run-down buildings and some tents. Farther away, there was a cabin beneath 2 tall trees. Those 2 tall trees were the only plant life he could see. There weren't even any weeds. The guard led Stanley to a small building. A sign on front said, "You are officially entering Camp Green Lake, Juvenile Correctional Facility." Next to it was another sign which declared that it was a violation of the Texas Penal Code to bring guns, explosive, weapons, drugs, or alcohol into the premises. As Stanley read the sign, he couldn't help but think, well, duh. The guards led Stanley into the building, where he felt the welcome relief of air conditioning. A man was sitting with his feet up on a desk. He turned his head when Stanley and the guard entered, but otherwise didn't move. Even though he was inside, he wore sunglasses and a cowboy hat. He also held a can of soda, and the sight of it made Stanley even more aware of his own thirst. He waited while the bus guard gave the man some papers to sign. That's a lot of sunflower seeds, the bus guard said to Stanley. Noticed. Sorry, let me read that one more time. That's a lot of sunflower seeds, the bus guard said. Stanley noticed a burlap bag filled with sunflower seeds on the floor next to his desk. I quit smoking last month, said the man in the cowboy hat. He had a tattoo of a rattlesnake on his arm, and he signed his name. And as he signed his name, the rattlesnake seemed to wiggle. I used to smoke a pack a day. Now I eat a sack of these every week. The guard laughed. There must have been a small refrigerator behind the desk because the man in the cowboy hat produced 2 more cans of soda. For a second, Stanley hoped that one might be for him, but the man gave one to the guard and the other was for the driver. 9 hours here and 9 hours back, the guard mumbled. What a day. Stanley thought about the long, miserable bus ride and felt a little sorry for the guard and the bus driver. The man in the cowboy hat spit sunflower seed shells into a waste paper basket. Then he walked around the desk to Stanley. My name is Mr. Sir, he said. Whenever you speak to me, you must call me by my name. Is that clear? Stanley hesitated. Yes, Mr. Sir, he said. Though he couldn't imagine that was really his name. Not in Girl Scouts camp anymore, Mr. Sir said. Stanley had to remove his clothing in front of Mr. Sir, who made sure he wasn't hiding anything. He was then given 2 sets of clothes and a towel. Each set consisted of a long-sleeve orange jumpsuit, an orange t-shirt, and yellow socks. Stanley wasn't sure if the socks had been yellow originally. He was also given white sneakers and an orange cap, and a canteen made of heavy plastic, which unfortunately was empty. The cap had a piece of cloth sewn in the back of it for neck protection. Stanley got dressed. The clothes smelled like soap. Mr. Sir told him he should wear 1 set to work in and 1 set for relaxation. Laundry was done every 3 days. On that day, his work clothes would be washed. Then the other set would become his work clothes, and he would get clean clothes to wear while resting. You are to dig 1 hole each day, including Saturdays and Sundays. Each hole must be 5 feet deep and 5 feet across in every direction. Your shovel is your measuring stick. Breakfast is served at 4:30. Stanley must have looked surprised because Mr. Sir went on to explain that they started early to avoid the hottest part of the day. No one's going to babysit you here, he added. The longer it takes you to dig, the longer you'll be out in the sun. If you dig up anything interesting, you ought to report it to me or another counselor. When you finish, the rest of the day is yours. Stanley nodded to show that he understood. This isn't a Girl Scout camp, said Mr. Sir. He checked Stanley's backpack and allowed him to keep it. Then he led Stanley outside to the blazing heat. Take a good look around you, Mr. Sir said. What do you see? Stanley looked across the vast wasteland. The air seemed thick with heat and dirt. Not much, he said, then hastily added, Mr. Sir. Mr. Sir laughed. You seen guard towers? No. How about an electric fence? No, Mr. Sir. There's no fence at all here, is there? No, Mr. Sir. You want to run away? Mr. Sir asked him. Stanley looked back at him, unsure of what he meant. You want to run away? Go ahead. Start running. I'm not going to stop you. Stanley didn't know what kind of game Mr. Sir was playing. I see you looking at my gun. Don't worry, I'm not going to shoot you. He tracked his holster. This here is for yellow spotted lizards. I wouldn't waste a bullet on you. I'm not going to run away, Stanley said. Good thinking, said Mr. Sir. Nobody runs away from here. We don't need a fence. Know why? Because we've got the only water for 100 miles. You want to run away? You'll be buzzard food in 3 days. Stanley could see some kids dressed in orange suits and carrying shovels, dragging themselves toward the tents. Are you thirsty? Asked Mr. Sir. Yes, Mr. Sir, Stanley said gratefully. Well, better get used to it. Gonna be thirsty for the next 18 months.